The sun hung low over the hillside cemetery, casting long shadows across weathered headstones like fingers reaching from the earth. Wildflowers swayed in the gentle breeze, their petals a fragile burst of yellow and purple against the grey stone. At the base of one grave, marked simply with a rusted iron cross and the name Jonah Crosswind Miller, a little girl knelt in the dirt. Annie Brooks was 7, her pigtails frayed from the wind, her small hands clutching a crumpled bouquet of daisies and clover she'd picked from the roadside. Tears streaked her cheeks, not from fear, but from a quiet ache she couldn't name. She whispered to the stone, her voice barely audible over the distant hum of traffic. "Mommy said you were brave, said you made a promise. I brought these for you, so you won't be alone." The cemetery was a forgotten corner of the world, tucked away on the outskirts of a dusty town where the air smelled of pine and regret. Annie had slipped away from home that morning, her mother's warnings about strangers echoing in her mind, but the pull of the story was stronger. Her mom, Sarah, had told her tales at bedtime about a man on a roaring bike who appeared like a guardian from the shadows, pulling her from harm's way years ago. Sarah never named him, only called him the wind that carried us safe. But Annie had overheard whispers, pieced together the grave's location from old photos tucked in a drawer. Now, alone with the silence, she pressed the flowers against the cool granite, her tiny fingers tracing the etched dates, born in the heat of summer, gone too soon in a crash that the town still murmured about. A low rumble shattered the peace, growing from a vibration in the ground to a thunderous roar that shook the leaves. Annie froze, her heart pounding as she looked up. Over the crest of the hill came a convoy of motorcycles, engines snarling like awakened beasts. Chrome gleamed under the fading light, leather vests emblazoned with the iron promise patch, a coiled serpent around an unbreakable chain, flapping in the wind. 50 riders strong, they rolled in formation, a brotherhood forged in the fires of lost battles and kept oaths. At the lead was Tom Hawk Daniels, his face weathered like old leather, eyes hidden behind aviator shades. They came every year to this spot, to honor Crosswind, their fallen brother whose life had been a whirlwind of speed and sacrifice. The bike slowed to a halt at the cemetery's edge, engines cutting off one by one until only the tick of cooling metal remained. Hawk dismounted first, his boots crunching on the gravel path, the scent of exhaust and oil mingling with the earthy dampness of the graves. The riders followed, a sea of denim and ink, their faces etched with the quiet gravity of remembrance. They carried no banners, no fanfare, just 6 packs of beer, a bottle of whiskey, and stories to share under the stars. But today, something was different. Hawk's gaze locked on the small figure by Crosswind's stone, and he raised a gloved hand, halting the group. Annie scrambled to her feet, clutching her flowers like a shield, her wide eyes darting from the towering figures to the ground. She backed away a step, but there was nowhere to run. The hill sloped sharply behind her. The bikers formed a loose semicircle, their presence overwhelming, yet strangely still, like predators who sensed a fragile thing in their midst. Hawk approached slowly, his steps measured, removing his shades to reveal eyes softened by years of hard choices. "Hey, little one," he said, his voice a gravelly rumble tempered with care. "This ain't no place for a kid alone. You lost?" She shook her head, chin lifting defiantly, though her lip trembled. "I'm not lost. I came for him." She pointed to the grave, her voice steadying. "Crosswind. Mommy said he saved her, said he promised she'd always be safe no matter what, even after, even if he wasn't here anymore." The words hung in the air, heavier than the whiskey they'd come to pour. Murmurs rippled through the riders. Jax, Thunder, Reyes. The club's enforcer with scars from desert wars exchanged a look with Lena Forge Harlan, the only woman in the core crew, her tattooed arms crossed over her chest. Crosswind's story was club legend, a lone rider who'd pulled a young woman from a wrecked car on a rain-slicked road a decade back, holding her hand through the ambulance ride, vowing protection like it was etched in his soul. He'd never spoken of it after, carrying on with the club's rides and runs, until that fateful night when his bike met twisted metal on a curve too sharp. They thought his promises died with him, buried under this hill. Hawk knelt to Annie's level, the knees of his jeans grinding into the dirt, the scent of wildflowers mixed with the faint tang of motor oil from his hands. "Your mommy. She got a name?" "Sarah Brooks," Annie whispered, as if saying it aloud might summon ghosts. "She told me stories about how he had eyes like storms and a laugh that chased the dark away. I wanted him to know we're okay, that his promise, it worked." A hush fell over the group, the kind that follows a revelation too raw to touch. Thunder stepped forward, his massive frame casting a shadow, but his voice was gentle. "Kid, Crosswind was one of us, iron promise. We ride for the forgotten oaths, the ones that bind tighter than blood." He glanced at Hawk, a silent question passing between them. This girl, with her innocent tribute, was no stranger. She was the echo of a vow they'd all sworn to uphold. Hawk placed a hand on her shoulder, light as a breeze. "You ain't alone anymore, Annie. That promise? It lives in all of us now." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of fire and gold, the riders gathered closer. They didn't roar away that night. Instead, they sat with her, sharing tales of Crosswind's wild rides and unyielding heart, the first threads of a new bond weaving through the dusk. What began as a solitary gesture on a lonely grave would ripple outward, drawing the club into a circle of protection that honored the past while forging a future unbreakable. But in that moment, as Annie's tears dried and laughter mingled with the cricket's song, none could foresee how deeply this encounter would test their loyalties or heal the scars they all carried. The whiskey was passed, toasts raised not just to the dead, but to the living proof that some winds never fade. The stars began to prick the velvet sky as the iron promise riders lingered by Crosswind's grave, their circle a makeshift hearth against the encroaching chill. Annie sat cross-legged on the dew-kissed grass, her small frame dwarfed by the men and women who formed a protective ring around her. The air carried the sharp bite of nightfall, laced with the smoky remnants of shared cigarettes and the faint, sweet residue of wildflowers crushed under boots. Hawk's voice rumbled low, recounting a tale from the road, Crosswind outrunning a storm on a twisted mountain pass, his bike cutting through sheets of rain like a blade through silk. "He always said promises were like chains," Hawk murmured, his calloused fingers tracing the iron cross. "Heavy to carry, but they hold you steady when the world's spinning out." Annie's eyes widened, reflecting the flicker of a lighter as thunder sparked another smoke. She leaned forward, her earlier fear melted into wide-eyed wonder. Did he ever talk about Mommy? About saving her? The question pierced the group like a sudden gust, and Lena knelt beside her, the leather of her vest creaking softly. Lena's hands, marked with faded ink from her days as a medic in forgotten conflicts, gently adjusted Annie's frayed pigtail. "He didn't say much, kiddo. Crosswind was the quiet type. Actions over words. But if your mom was the one from that wreck, yeah. He carried that night in his eyes till the end." The revelation settled like dust after a ride, stirring memories they'd buried with their brother. Jax, Thunder, stood sentinel at the edge of the group, his broad shoulders tense as he scanned the dark tree line. The cemetery felt too exposed now, the distant hum of a passing car on the highway twisting into something watchful. "We can't leave her out here," he said, voice a low growl. "Town's got eyes, and not all of 'em friendly. Hawk, we ride her home?" Hawk nodded, the decision unspoken but ironclad. The club didn't abandon echoes of their oaths. They amplified them. With careful hands, they lifted Annie onto the back of Hawk's bike, her tiny arms wrapping around his waist like vines claiming a post. The convoy reformed, engines coughing to life in a symphony of restrained power, deep bass throbs that vibrated through the ground, headlights slicing the night like beacons. They rolled out slow, a rolling fortress through the winding roads that snaked toward the town's flickering lights. Annie's laughter bubbled up once, carried on the wind, as the chrome beasts ate up the miles. The scent of pine thickened, mingling with the hot metal tang of exhaust, and for a fleeting moment the world narrowed to the rhythm of tires on asphalt and the warmth of found kin. The Brooks home was a weathered, clapboard house on the edge of town, its porch light a lone yellow glow against the encroaching shadows, paint peeled like old skin, and a single chain-link fence sagged under the weight of overgrown vines. As the bikes pulled up in a gravel-crunching arc, porch lights flickered on in neighboring windows, curtains twitching with wary glances. Hawk killed his engine first, the silence sudden and heavy. Annie slid down, pointing eagerly. "That's us. Mummy's probably worried sick." But her steps faltered at the door, the earlier defiance cracking under the weight of reality. Before Hawk could knock, the door swung open. Sarah Brooks stood there, mid-30s with lines of exhaustion etched around her eyes, her dark hair pulled into a hasty bun. She wore a faded apron dusted with flour, as if she'd been baking away her fears. Her gaze swept from Annie to the sea of leather-clad figures, widening in shock. "Annie! Oh, God, where—" Her words choked off as recognition dawned, like a long, dormant spark igniting. She dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into a fierce hug, the scent of vanilla and worry enveloping them both. The riders hung back, respectful shadows. But Hawk stepped forward, removing his helmet under the dim bulb. "Ma'am, name's Tom Daniels. Hawk to most. Your girl's got a story about a grave and a promise." Sarah's head snapped up, her arms tightening around Annie. Tears welled unbidden as fragments of the past collided with the present. You're with him, with Crosswind." Her voice cracked, the name tasting like salt on her tongue. She'd never sought him out after that night, the ambulance lights blurring into hospital haze, his hand warm in hers as he whispered vows of safety before vanishing into the dawn. Life had barreled on, a deadbeat gone, a child to raise, shadows of old threats lingering like bad debts. Hawk nodded, his expression a map of shared sorrows. He was ours. Iron promise. We ride for the oaths that don't break. He gestured to the group, where Lena held out a thermos of hot coffee, steam curling like ghosts. "Annie brought flowers, said you told her the tales. We figured, well, hell, that promise ain't dust. It's ours now, too." Sarah rose slowly, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand, the apron smearing flour across her cheek. She glanced at the bikes, gleaming sentinels under the street lamp, and something in her posture shifted, from solitary guard to reluctant ally. Inside, the house was a humble nest. Mismatched furniture, drawings pinned to the fridge, the faint aroma of cooling bread. The riders crammed into the living room, too large for the space, their boots leaving faint dirt trails on the rug. Stories flowed like the whiskey they'd stashed outside. Crosswind's wild chases, his quiet acts of mercy on rain-slick nights. Sarah listened, her hand in Annie's, as the pieces wove together. But beneath the warmth, a shadow stirred. "It's not just stories," she admitted softly, voice dropping as the clock ticked past midnight. "Lately, things feel off. Calls at night, a car lingering too long. Like the past ain't done with us." Her eyes met Hawk's, a silent plea hanging in the air. Thunder's jaw tightened from his spot by the window, fists clenching. The club knew those signs, old enemies circling, debts unpaid in a world that chewed up the vulnerable. Hawk leaned forward, the floorboards creaking under his weight. "Then we face it together. Iron promise, Don't let oaths fade. As the first hints of dawn greyed the windows, the group shared a quiet nod, the bond sealing like riveted steel. Annie yawned, curling against her mother, oblivious to the storm brewing. But in the quiet vows exchanged that night, the riders committed to more than memory. They pledged to shield the living legacy of a man who'd given everything for a stranger's safety. The engine roars would return soon, carrying them into the fray, where loyalty would be tested and redemption forged in the fire of unspoken threats. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The morning light filtered through the lace curtains of the Brooks living room, casting delicate patterns on the worn wooden floor like fleeting promises etched in gold. The air hung heavy with the aroma of fresh coffee brewing in the kitchen, mingling with the faint, lingering trace of leather and exhaust from the riders who'd crashed there through the night. Hawk stirred first, his broad frame unfolding from the sagging couch where he'd kept watch, muscles aching from the awkward vigil. Outside, the bikes stood in a silent phalanx, dew beading on their chrome like unshed tears. The town was just waking, distant roosters crowing a ragged dawn chorus, but inside, the weight of last night's revelations pressed like an unseen storm cloud. Sarah moved quietly in the kitchen, her hands steady as she poured mugs, though her eyes betrayed the flicker of old fears resurfacing. Annie slept soundly in her room, tucked under quilts that smelled of lavender and childhood dreams, oblivious to the shift in the air. Lena joined Sarah at the counter, her presence a quiet anchor, sleeves rolled up to reveal the intricate tattoos that mapped her own battles, symbols of chains unbroken, winds that guided lost souls. "You don't have to carry this alone anymore," Lena said softly, her voice a steady hum over the percolator's gurgle. "Crosswind's oath? It's woven into us. Whatever's haunting your doorstep, we'll stand against it." Sarah nodded, but her grip tightened on the mug, knuckles whitening. It started small. Hang-up calls in the dead of night, shadows under the streetlights, then letters, no postmark, just warnings to keep quiet about the past. I thought it was the ex, chasing ghosts of debts he left behind. But after Annie's dad split, I changed our names, moved twice. This feels deeper, like someone knows exactly who I was back then. Her words trailed off as Hawk entered, Thunder and a few others filing in behind, their boots muffled on the rug to avoid waking the girl. The room felt smaller with them in it, a fortress of resolve amid the fragility of everyday life. Hawk accepted the coffee, the steam rising like a veil between him and the uncertainty. "Tell us everything. From that night, Crosswind pulled you from the wreck." Sarah leaned against the counter, the cool formica grounding her as memories flooded back. The screech of tires on wet pavement, the jolt of impact that stole her breath, the metallic tang of blood and rain. I was 22, running from a bad crowd in the city, owed money to the wrong people, loan sharks with ties to bigger shadows. That car crash, it wasn't an accident. They ran me off the road, left me for dead on a curve no one checks. She paused, eyes distant, the porcelain mug warm in her hands. He appeared out of nowhere, bike roaring like thunder. Pulled me free, held my hand the whole way to the hospital, whispered that promise, "You're safe now, and you'll stay that way. Iron don't bend." I never saw him again, but those words, they kept me going when I had nothing. Thunder's face darkened, his massive hands curling into fists at his sides, the faint scar on his knuckles pulling tight. He'd ridden with Crosswind through sand-swept ops overseas, seen the man's quiet code in action, saving a pinned comrade under fire, vowing silence on the scars that never healed. Sounds like the vultures from the old syndicates. We crossed paths with them once, back when Crosswind was scouting runs for the club. Corrupt crews hiding behind suits and badges, squeezing the weak for every drop. The word syndicates hung like smoke, evoking images of shadowed boardrooms and back-alley deals, the kind that twisted justice into knots. Hawke set his mug down with a soft clink, the decision forming in the lines of his jaw. "We ride out today, scout the town, eyes on your place, no confrontations yet, just shadows watching shadows." The plan unfolded in murmurs. Lena and two others would stay with Sarah and Annie, fortifying the home with subtle defenses, motion lights rigged from club spares, a burner phone for alerts. The rest would fan out, engines low to blend with the morning traffic, tracing the threads of threat back to their source. As they geared up outside, the sun climbed higher, burning off the mist and revealing the town's sleepy facade. Boarded shops, a diner spilling the scent of bacon and grease, pickups rumbling past with indifferent stares. Annie emerged then, rubbing sleep from her eyes, her nightgown patterned with faded stars. She beamed at the riders, clutching a stuffed bear that had seen better days. "Are you all staying? Like a big family picnic?" Sarah knelt to her level, smoothing her hair, the warmth of the moment a brief shield. "Something like that, sweetie. These folks, they're here to keep us safe, just like the stories." Hawke crouched too, his aviators perched on his head, revealing eyes that held the depth of endless roads. "Your flowers yesterday? They woke something in us, kid." Crosswind would have been proud. He ruffled her hair gently, the gesture simple yet binding, a silent vow passed from one generation to the next. The convoy departed in waves, not the thunderous roar of arrival, but a measured growl, dispersing like smoke on the breeze. Hawke led the first group toward the highway's edge, where faded billboards advertised motels and forgotten diners. The wind whipped through his vest, carrying the pine-scented air and the undercurrent of tension. They paused at a gas station, pumps humming under the relentless sun, the attendant's wary glance sliding over their patches. Thunder fueled his bike, wiping sweat from his brow, when his phone buzzed, a tip from a contact in the shadows. "Old warehouse district, east side. Whispers of a meet tonight. Suits talking about a loose end from 10 years back." Back at the house, Lena taught Annie basic signals. Hand waves for all clear, a whistle for trouble, turning the backyard into a game of guardians. Sarah watched from the porch, the chain-link fence a flimsy barrier against the unknown, her heart swelling with a gratitude laced in fear. The afternoon stretched, shadows lengthening as the heat baked the earth, releasing the dry scent of parched grass. A car idled too long at the corner, its tinted windows reflecting the glare before peeling away. Lena's hand went to her hip, where a concealed tool spoke of readiness without aggression. As dusk painted the sky in bruised purples, Hawke's group reconvened at a roadside overlook, the valley sprawling below like a map of hidden veins. The intel confirmed it. The threats tied back to a remnant crew, enforcers who'd scattered after a bust years ago, now circling old scores. Crosswind had disrupted their plans that rainy night, vanishing their mark, Sarah into safety. But grudges festered, and now, with Annie's innocent act stirring the grave's dust, the past clawed back. "We don't strike blind," Hawke said, his voice cutting through the cooling air. "Truth first, then justice. For him. For them." The riders nodded, engines idling like patient beasts, the horizon swallowing the last light. Loyalty wasn't a word they spoke. It was the chain that linked them, unbreakable against the gathering dark. In the Brooks home, as Annie's laughter echoed from a shared story, the promise endured, not as a ghost, but as a living shield, ready to face the storm that loyalty demanded. The night deepened, carrying whispers of confrontation, where honor would demand its due and redemption carve its path through the shadows. The warehouse district loomed on the town's eastern fringe, a skeletal maze of rusting silos and chain-link barriers under the moon's pale scrutiny. Floodlights buzzed like angry hornets, casting jagged pools of yellow across cracked concrete, where the air thickened with the oily reek of stagnant water and forgotten machinery. Hawk's bike idled at the perimeter, its low growl muffled by the rag wrapped over the exhaust, a trick from old runs to slip through watchful nights. He cut the engine, the sudden silence amplifying the distant clank of metal on metal, like chains rattling in the wind. Thunder crouched beside him in the shadows of a derelict truck, his breath steady but eyes sharp, scanning the chain-link fence that sagged under years of neglect. "We go quiet," Hawk whispered, his voice a thread of gravel in the dark. Eyes only. No ghosts stirred tonight. The intel had led them here, a nondescript meet in the husk of an old mill, whispers of suits tying loose ends from a decade-old score. Crosswind's intervention that rainy night hadn't just saved Sarah, it had unraveled a thread in their web, leaving enforcers with empty hands and festering grudges. Now, with the club's presence rippling through town like a stone in still water, the shadows were stirring. Hawk's gloved hand gripped the fence, the cold wire biting through leather as he peered through a gap. Figures moved inside, 3 men in ill-fitting jackets, their faces obscured by the dim glow of a lantern, voices carrying in low, clipped tones. "The kid's mum, she's the key. That biker fool thought he buried it, but the girl's poking graves now. Loose ends get tied, or we all pay." The words slithered out, laced with the casual menace of men who'd long blurred the line between debt and destruction. Thunder's jaw clenched, a muscle twitching like a live wire, but Hawk's hand on his arm held him fast. The third figure paced, a silhouette etched against the lantern's flicker, phone pressed to his ear. "Yeah, boss. We'll handle the Brooks place tomorrow. Quiet-like. No traces." The call ended with a snap, and the group dispersed, engines coughing to life in the distance. Sedans, not bikes, vanishing into the night like smoke. Hawk pulled back, the fence creaking under his weight, heart pounding a steady rhythm against his ribs. The confirmation burned. Sarah and Annie weren't ghosts of the past. They were targets in the present, the club's unwitting beacon drawing fire. "We ride back. Tell Sarah everything. No more waiting." Thunder nodded, the weight of unspoken fury in his eyes. But there was steel there too, the kind forged in the crucible of oaths kept against odds. They mounted up, engines whispering to life, slipping away through back alleys where the scent of damp asphalt and distant rain clung to the air. The road back wound like a vein through sleeping neighborhoods, porch lights winking like wary eyes, the wind carrying the faint chill of approaching trouble. At the Brooks house, the night had deepened into a fragile peace. Lena sat on the porch steps, her silhouette a sentinel against the starry vault, a thermos of coffee cooling beside her. Inside, Sarah tucked Annie into bed. The girl's questions about guardian angels on bikes met with soft reassurances, the room's air warm with the scent of chamomile tea and worn linens. But Sarah's hands trembled as she smoothed the quilt, the day's revelations churning like gravel in her gut. Lena had shared fragments of club lore, tales of Crosswind's unyielding code, how he'd once ridden through a blizzard to deliver aid to a stranded family, vanishing before thanks could bind him. "He saw something in you that night," Lena had said earlier, her voice steady over the sizzle of a late supper on the stove. "Worth protecting, and now, so do we." The rumble of returning bikes shattered the quiet, headlights sweeping the driveway like searchlights before dimming to pools of amber. Hawk dismounted first, his boots grinding into the gravel, face etched with the grim resolve of truths unearthed. Sarah met him at the door, Annie's door clicking shut behind her, the house's single bulb casting long shadows across her worried features. "What did you find?" she asked, arms crossing over her chest like a barrier, the faint scent of tea clinging to her sweater. Hawk removed his helmet, running a hand through sweat-damp hair, the air between them thick with unspoken stakes. "They're coming for you, old crew from the city, remnants of the ones who ran you off that road. Your name, Annie's, it's resurfaced. Blame Crosswind for spoiling their play back then." His words landed like stones in still water, rippling through Sarah's composure. She leaned against the doorframe, the wood cool against her palm, eyes distant as memories clawed back. The flash of headlights in the rear view, the crunch of metal, the stranger's voice cutting through pain like a lifeline. Thunder joined them, his bulk filling the porch, voice a low rumble. "We heard 'em plan it, tomorrow," they said, "but we move first, scout their holes, cut the lines without a drop spilled." It was justice, not vengeance, the club's code etched deep. Truth as the sharpest blade, loyalty the unbreakable shield. Sarah's breath hitched, gratitude warring with fear, but in her gaze flickered a spark of the woman who'd survived that wreck, resilient, unbowed. "I can't let you all risk this for us, for a promise I barely remember." Hawk stepped closer, the porch light glinting off his iron promise patch, a serpent coiled in eternal vigilance. "That promise is why we're here. Crosswind didn't save you for glory, he did it 'cause it's right, and right don't fade." Lena rose, placing a hand on Sarah's shoulder, the touch a bridge between solitary struggle and chosen kin. Inside, the clock ticked onward, marking the hours until dawn, when the real test would begin. Annie stirred in her sleep, murmuring about flowers and winds, oblivious to the fortress forming around her. As the riders settled into watches, Thunder by the fence, Lena at the windows, the night air cooled, carrying the whisper of pine from the hills. Hawk lingered on the porch with Sarah, sharing a smoke whose ember glowed like a tiny sun. "Ever wonder why he called himself Crosswind?" Hawk asked, exhaling a plume that twisted skyward. "Said it was 'cause promises cross paths unexpected, like gusts in a storm. Carry you safe, even when you can't see the way." Sarah managed a small smile, the first real one since the grave, the weight lifting just enough to breathe. In that shared silence, bonds deepened, not born of blood, but forged in the fire of honor, a family claimed against the encroaching dark. Dawn crept in slow, painting the horizon in hesitant grays, the first birdsong piercing the hush. The club mobilized quietly, bikes prepped with muffled pipes, routes mapped on a crumpled napkin under the kitchen light. Sarah watched from the window, Annie still dreaming, her heart swelling with a fierce protectiveness laced in hope. The threats loomed, ethical shadows testing their resolve, confront corruption without becoming it, uphold justice through quiet strength. But as engines hummed to life in the yard, the promise pulsed alive, a wind that refused to die, carrying them toward redemption's edge, where loyalty would face its fiercest gale. And now, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact hour you heard this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel and at what moments they reach you. The first rays of dawn sliced through the pines like hesitant blades, gilding the brook's yard in a wash of amber and shadow. Hawk's bike coughed to life with a restrained purr, the exhaust's warm tang cutting through the crisp morning air, heavy with the scent of damp earth and blooming jasmine from the overgrown fence. The riders moved like a well-oiled machine, Thunder checking tire pressure with gloved hands, Lena securing a small pack of essentials to her saddlebag, the metallic clink of buckles echoing softly. Sarah stood on the porch, arms wrapped around Annie, who clutched her bare with wide-eyed curiosity, the girl's nightgown fluttering in the gentle breeze. "You promise you'll come back?" Annie asked, her voice a fragile thread amid the gathering hum. Hawk turned, helmet tucked under his arm, his weathered face softening in the light. "Promises are what we ride for, kid. This one's ironclad." He nodded to Sarah, a silent exchange passing between them. The weight of trust forged in the night's confessions. The convoy split into pairs, engines idling low to avoid rousing the neighborhood's sleepy rhythm, distant dog barks, the faint sizzle of breakfast pans from open windows. Hawk and Thunder headed east toward the warehouse district, their path a winding ribbon of cracked asphalt flanked by skeletal billboards advertising long-gone motels. The wind whipped through Hawk's vest, carrying the cool bite of dew and the undercurrent of resolve, his mind replaying the overheard threats like a looped reel. Loose ends, tied quiet. Miles out, the town gave way to industrial sprawl, silos looming like forgotten sentinels against the paling sky. They parked in the shadow of a rusted water tower, the structure's drip echoing like a metronome in the hush. Thunder dismounted first, his boots crunching on gravel strewn with shattered glass that glinted like scattered stars. "Perimeter check," he murmured, voice a low vibration. They slipped through a gap in the chain link, the wire snagging at their sleeves, the air thickening with the stale musk of oil and decay. Footprints marred the dust, fresh, purposeful, leading to the mill's yawning entrance, where faint voices drifted like smoke from within. Hawk signaled a halt, pressing against the corrugated wall, the metal cool and pitted under his palm. Peering through a jagged rent, he glimpsed the figures from the night before. The three men, now joined by a fourth in a crisp shirt that screamed false legitimacy. Maps unrolled on a makeshift table, illuminated by a bare bulb swinging lazily, casting faces in stark relief, hard lines, eyes narrowed in calculation. "The Brooks woman saw too much back then," one said, tapping a photo that Hawk recognized as Sarah, grainy but unmistakable. "Crosswind meddled, but the girl's stirring it up. We end it clean, payoff or pressure, no bikers complicating things." Thunder's breath hitched beside him, a coiled spring of restrained fury. But Hawk's grip on his arm steadied the storm. This wasn't a brawl, it was a reckoning, justice served through exposure, not fists. They retreated silently, hearts pounding in sync with the tower's drip, mounting up and veering toward a nearby payphone booth, relic of simpler evasions, its glass fogged with condensation. Hawk dialed a contact from the club's network, a retired badge with a grudge against the syndicate's rot. "It's Hawk. Got names, faces, warehouse east side, pull strings, anonymous tip to the clean feds. Let the light do the work." The call ended with a click, the receiver heavy in his hand, the booth's confined space amplifying the scent of old cigarettes and faded ink. As they rode back, the sun climbed fully, burning away the mist and revealing the road's scars, potholes like old wounds, wildflowers pushing through cracks as defiant as Annie's bouquet. Tension coiled in Hawk's gut, the ethical tightrope clear. Disrupt without descending, honor Crosswind's code by choosing truth over the easy rage that had claimed lesser men. Back at the house, the morning unfolded in measured calm. Sarah busied herself in the kitchen, the sizzle of eggs in the pan, a rhythmic counterpoint to her racing thoughts, the aroma of butter and herbs filling the space like a balm. Annie colored at the table, crayons scraping paper with vibrant strokes, bikes and flowers under a stormy sky, her laughter a bright spark when Lena joined her, sketching a serpent chain that twisted into a protective loop. "See? It holds everything safe," Lena explained, her voice warm over the clatter of plates. But Sarah's eyes flicked to the window, where the fence's vines swayed in the breeze, every passing car a potential shadow. The phone rang sharp at noon, shattering the fragile peace. A landline's trill that set teeth on edge. Sarah answered, her hello, tentative, met with silence thick as fog. Then a voice, distorted and low. "Stories end when you stop telling them. Keep quiet, or the kid pays." The line went dead, leaving her hand trembling on the receiver, the kitchen's warmth turning cloying. She called for Lena, words tumbling out in a rush, the ethical dilemma crashing over her like a wave. Had her reaching out to the grave invited this? Lena's face hardened, but her touch was steady, guiding Sarah to the table where Annie hummed obliviously. Hawk and Thunder arrived as the sun peaked, dust swirling in their wake, engines cutting off with a final sigh. They gathered in the living room, the space once humble now, a war room of sorts. Napkin maps spread on the coffee table, the faint scent of ink mingling with cooling lunch. Hawk recounted the warehouse, the photo, the tip dispatched. They're cornered now. Feds'll sniff 'em out by evening. No blood on our hands. Thunder paced, the floorboards groaning under his steps, his internal storm evident in the flex of his scarred knuckles. But if they move first? On her, on the girl? Sarah met his gaze, her earlier tremor replaced by a quiet fire, the promise's echo stealing her spine. Then we stand, like he would have. Annie wandered in then, holding up her drawing, the colours aburst against the room's tension. Look, it's all of us riding the wind. The group paused, the image piercing the haze, a visual vow of unity, family chosen in crayon lines. Hawk knelt, studying it, the paper crinkling softly. In that moment redemption flickered, not just survival, but legacy. Crosswind's oath blooming in the unlikeliest soil. But as afternoon shadows stretched, a distant engine growl intruded. Not the club's, but foreign, circling the block with deliberate slowness. Thunder moved to the window, parting the curtain a fraction. The glass cool against his forehead. The car idled at the corner, tinted windows reflecting the glare, before accelerating away. The air thickened, suspense coiling like a spring. Had the tip landed too late? Hawk's hand went to his belt, not for force, but readiness, the moral line blurring under pressure. We hold the line. Truth's coming, but loyalty waits for no one. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling leaves like whispers of the gathering gale, carrying the promise forward into uncertainty. The club braced, bonds tightening against the ethical storm, where justice's blade would test if oaths could outrun the dark. The afternoon sun beat down relentlessly on the Brooks yard, turning the air into a shimmering haze that distorted the chain-link fence like a mirage. Dust motes danced in the slanting light, kicked up by the idle breeze that tugged at the vines, their leaves whispering secrets against the metal. Inside, the living room felt like a held breath, curtains drawn halfway, casting striped shadows across the coffee table where the napkin map lay crumpled, edges curling like hesitant fingers. Hawk stood by the window, his silhouette rigid, the faint scent of gun oil from his cleaned gear mingling with the lingering aroma of lunch's herbs. Thunder paced the perimeter outside, his heavy steps crunching gravel in a deliberate rhythm, eyes locked on the road where that foreign car had vanished. Sarah sat on the edge of the couch, her hands clasped in her lap, knuckles pale against the faded fabric. Annie played nearby on the rug, stacking blocks into a wobbly tower that mimicked the riders' bikes, her giggles a fragile counterpoint to the tension coiling through the room. Lena knelt beside her, guiding a block with a steady hand, her voice low and even. Steady now, like holding a promise, one piece at a time. But Sarah's gaze drifted to the phone on the wall, its silence mocking, the earlier call's distortion echoing in her mind like a bad dream. "What if they come before your friends arrive?" she whispered, the words barely stirring the air. Hawk turned from the window, his boots scuffing softly on the rug, the floorboards creaking under his weight like an old friend's sigh. "They won't catch us flat. The tip's out. Truth's a slow burn, but it spreads." His eyes, shadowed by the brim of his cap, held hers with the quiet certainty of roads travelled too many times. The club's code wasn't forged in flash, it was the patient grind of loyalty, the choice to stand unyielding when corruption circled like vultures. Outside, a bird called sharply from the pines, its cry slicing the haze, and Thunder's voice rumbled through the screen door. "Movement! 2 blocks out! Same sedan, plus a truck. Slow roll." The room snapped taut. Hawk moved to Sarah's side, his presence a wall of leather and resolve, the faint warmth of his arm brushing hers, a silent anchor. "Get Annie to the back room. Bar the door." Sarah nodded, scooping up her daughter with a mother's swift grace, the girl's blocks tumbling in a clatter that seemed deafening in the hush. "Mommy, is it a game?" Annie asked, her small hand clutching Sarah's sweater, the fabric soft and worn from countless washes. The best kind, hide and seek with the strongest team. They slipped down the hall, the door clicking shut behind them, a chair scraping as it wedged under the knob. Lena joined Hawk at the front, her frame coiled like a spring, the tattoo on her forearm, a chain linking storm clouds, glinting in the light. Thunder circled back, slipping through the side gate with the stealth of a man who'd navigated worse than suburban threats. They're stopping at the corner. 4 out, jackets, no faces clear, talking low, pointing this way. The air thickened with the distant murmur of engines idling, a low growl that vibrated through the walls like an approaching thunderhead. Hawk peered through the curtain's sliver, the glass cool against his cheek, catching glimpses. Men in nondescript coats, one gesturing toward the house with a clipped nod, the sun glinting off a badge that didn't quite fit. A corrupt thread in the syndicate's frayed weave. No guns drawn, no rush, just the calculated creep of intimidation, the kind that preyed on fear without leaving marks. But iron promise didn't yield to shadows. Hawk stepped onto the porch, the boards groaning under his boots, the sun's heat radiating up through the soles. "We meet 'em halfway," he said to Thunder and Lena, voice a steady anchor. "Words first. Show 'em the lines drawn." They fanned out, not in aggression, but formation. Hawk at the center, Thunder flanking left, Lena right, their patches gleaming like warnings etched in chrome. The scent of hot asphalt rose from the road, mingling with the pine's sharp tang as the men approached, steps deliberate on the gravel shoulder. The leader halted 10 paces out, a wiry figure with slicked hair and eyes like chipped flint, his companions hanging back like echoes. "Heard you bikers been sniffing around old business," he said, voice oily smooth, laced with the false calm of authority borrowed from darker places. "This ain't your lane. The brook's loose thread. We tie it, town stays quiet." His gaze flicked to the house, a smirk curling his lip, the implication hanging heavy as the humid air. Hawk stood unmoving, arms loose at his sides, the wind rifling through his hair like an old ally. "Threads like that. They unravel when light hits them. We know your game. Warehouse meets old scores. Fed's got the tip. Walk away clean, or the truth drags you down." The words landed like gravel in a still pond, rippling through the group. The leader's smirk faltered, eyes narrowing as realization dawned, their plans exposed, the moral high ground slipping like sand. Thunder shifted, his bulk a silent threat, while Lena's stare bored steady, unblinking. A radio crackled from the sedan, urgent static cutting the standoff, the leader's hand twitching toward his pocket. "What tip? You got nothing?" But the distant wail of sirens pierced the sky, growing from a whine to a howl, blue lights flashing over the hill like judgment's herald. The men froze, faces paling under the relentless sun, the ethical noose tightening without a single blow. Hawk didn't advance. He simply watched, the promise's weight in his stance, a living testament to Crosswind's code, justice, poetic and unyielding. The enforcers scattered then, piling into vehicles with frantic haste, tires squealing on the pavement as they fled the converging lights. Sirens swelled, federal badges emerging from unmarked cars that had been shadowing since the warehouse dawn. No shots, no chase, just the inexorable pull of truth, corruption laid bare under the afternoon glare. Hawk exhaled slowly, the tension uncoiling like a released breath as Lena clapped his shoulder, the leather of her glove warm. "Oath held," she murmured, the words a quiet victory. Back inside, Sarah emerged from the back room, Annie peeking from behind her legs, the girl's eyes wide but unafraid. The sirens faded into echoes, carrying away the shadows, leaving the yard bathed in golden light that seemed brighter, purer. Hawk knelt to Annie's level, the gravel biting into his knees, and offered a small smile. "See? Winds change direction. Your flowers started it all. Brought the storm, cleared the sky." She nodded, hugging her bear tighter, the moment sealing the bond deeper, a chosen family etched in the day's hard-won peace. As the sun dipped toward evening, painting the pines in fiery hues, the club gathered on the porch, mugs of cooling coffee in hand, stories murmured of roads ahead. The threat had recoiled, but redemption's path stretched on, loyalty's chain linking past to future in unbreakable loops. Sarah watched Hawk, gratitude softening her features, the air alive with the hum of crickets and the faint, enduring scent of wildflowers. Promises, it seemed, bloomed eternal, their roots sinking deep into the soil of honor, ready to weather whatever gales remained. The horizon beckoned, a canvas of quiet triumph, where the iron promise rode not just for survival, but for the legacy that outlived the grave. The evening sun dipped low, bathing the brook's porch in a warm, amber glow that softened the edges of the weathered wood and chased away the last vestiges of the day's tension. Crickets began their symphony in the overgrown yard, a rhythmic chirp underscoring the quiet that had settled like a well-earned blanket over the group. The air carried the faint, sweet residue of wildflowers from Annie's earlier bouquet, now wilting in a mason jar on the railing, mingling with the earthy scent of cooling soil and the distant tang of pine from the hills. Hawk leaned against the post, his arms crossed over his leather vest, the iron promise patch catching the light like a badge of quiet victory. Thunder sat on the steps, nursing a bottle of water, his massive frame relaxed for the first time since dawn, while Lena perched on the swing, gently pushing it with one boot, her tattooed fingers drumming a soft beat on the chain. Sarah emerged from the house, balancing a tray of mismatched mugs filled with steaming chamomile tea, the herbal steam curling upward like released sighs. Annie trailed behind her, barefoot and beaming, her drawing from earlier clutched in one hand, a colourful testament to bikes, winds, and unbreakable circles. The girl's cheeks were flushed from the excitement, her pigtails slightly askew, but her eyes sparkled with the unfiltered joy of a storm past. "I made everyone tea, like Mummy does after a big day," she announced, handing the first mug to Hawk with careful hands, the porcelain warm against his calluses. Hawk accepted it with a nod, the steam brushing his face like a gentle wind, evoking memories of crosswind sharing brews by campfire light on long rides. "Smells like peace, kid. Just what we needed." He took a sip, the liquid soothing the raw edges of the day's grind, and glanced at Sarah, who settled beside Lena on the swing. Her posture had shifted, no longer hunched against invisible weights, but open, the lines of worry around her eyes easing into something resembling hope. The siren's wail had faded hours ago, carrying the enforcers away in a convoy of flashing lights and unanswered questions. The federal sweep had unraveled the syndicate's remnants like a frayed rope, arrests at the warehouse, ledgers seized, the corrupt threads exposed to sunlight. No blood spilled, no oaths broken, just justice, poetic and precise, honoring the code that Crosswind had lived by. Thunder raised his mug in a silent toast, the glass clinking softly against the railing. "Heard from our contact. It's done. Those shadows won't touch this town again." His voice rumbled low, the words heavy with finality, but laced with the relief of a man who'd stared down worse gales. Lena smiled faintly, her swing creaking in rhythm with the crickets. Crosswind always said the wind shifts when you stand your ground. Today proved it. She reached out, ruffling Annie's hair, the gesture maternal and sure, drawing a giggle from the girl who climbed onto the swing between them. Sarah watched the scene, her mug cradled in both hands, the warmth seeping into her palms like a balm for old scars. The afternoon standoff replayed in her mind, the enforcer's retreat, Hawk's unyielding stance, the sirens arriving like fate's own cavalry. It wasn't vengeance that had won the day. It was the quiet power of truth, amplified by loyalty, that refused to bend. I never thought, after all these years, that promise would circle back like this, she said softly, her voice threading through the evening hush. You all risked everything for strangers, for a story I told to keep the dark away. Hawk set his mug down, the porcelain scraping lightly on the wood, and knelt to Annie's level once more, the porch boards flexing under his weight. The sun's rays caught the rusted iron cross pendant he wore, a relic from Crosswind's bike, etched with faint dates now symbolic of endurance. Strangers? Nah, that night he pulled you from the wreck. He saw family in the making. Iron promise ain't about blood, it's the chains we choose, the ones that hold when the road gets rough. He glanced up at Sarah, his eyes reflecting the fading light, steady as the hills beyond. You're in now, both of you. Rides, barbecues, watches on the tough nights. We protect our own. Annie tilted her head, her small fingers tracing the serpent on Hawk's patch, the leather cool and worn under her touch. Like the flowers I left, they grow back stronger after rain. The innocence in her words pierced the group, a simple truth that wove through the scars they all carried. Hawks from lost brothers in desert sands, thunders from battles that left ghosts in his wake, Lena's from healing wounds that never fully closed. Sarah's hand found Annie's, squeezing gently. The bond between mother and daughter now extended, a family chosen in the forge of crisis. As twilight deepened, painting the sky in strokes of indigo and rose, the riders shared fragments of the club's lore, not the thunderous runs or shadowed deals, but the quiet honors, delivering meals to shut-ins, standing vigil for a member's ailing kin, mending fences in storm-ravaged towns. Thunder recounted a tale of Crosswind, riding solo through a blizzard to aid a stranded family, his bike's roar cutting the whiteout like a promise fulfilled. He never boasted, just did it, 'cause right called louder than the wind. Laughter rippled then, light and unforced, as Annie mimicked the story with exaggerated whooshes, her bear propped on the railing like a tiny sentinel. The stars emerged one by one, pricking the velvet dome overhead, the air cooling to carry the night's crisp promise. Hawk rose, stretching his shoulders, the faint ache from the day's tension, a reminder of costs paid willingly. We'll rotate watches till the dust settles, but this house, it's iron territory now. Sarah stood too, pulling Annie close, the girl's head resting against her side. Gratitude swelled in her chest, a tide washing away the isolation of single-mother struggles and lingering fears. Redemption wasn't a grand gesture. It was this, oaths outliving their makers, loyalty blooming in unexpected soil, justice restoring what corruption sought to shatter. The group lingered until the moon hung high, casting silver paths across the yard, the wildflowers in the jar seeming to glow with ethereal light. Bikes waited patiently in the drive, chrome dulled by dew, engines silent but ready. As Hawk mounted up for the first patrol, the rumble built low, a guardian's hum fading into the night. Sarah called out, her voice steady and clear, "Thank you for seeing us, for carrying him forward." He nodded, the wind tousling his hair, and rode off with thunder, taillights winking like fireflies into the dark. In the quiet that followed, Lena helped clear the mugs, the clink of porcelain a soothing coda. Annie yawned, eyes heavy, as Sarah carried her inside, the door clicking shut on a chapter closed and a legacy reborn. The promise that began on a rain-slicked road, etched in a dying rider's vow, had woven through time to this porch, binding strangers into kin. Honor's legacy wasn't in marble or metal, but in the living chains of protection, sacrifice, and the unyielding heart that chose family over solitude. Under the stars, the iron promise endured, a wind that carried safety to those who'd thought themselves forgotten, proving that some oaths once given echoed eternal. Thank you for riding with us through this tale of unbreakable promises and chosen hearts. If it stirred your soul, hit that like button, subscribe for more stories of quiet courage, and ring the bell. We'll see you on the next road.